Hello everyone, my name is Elisa Baum and I am Percona's Director of Product Marketing. We will begin in just a moment, but first I'd like to conduct just a little bit of housekeeping. First, please raise your hand using the hand icon located in the GoToWebinar control panel to let me know that you can hear me. Okay, I see a couple of hands. Good. All right, great. Next, during this webinar, you will be on mute. Should you have any questions during the discussion, please enter them in the questions field within the control panel. At the end of the webinar, we will take time to answer as many questions as possible. Those that aren't addressed will be answered in a follow-up blog post at some point in the future on Percona's MySQL Performance blog. In addition, I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the recording of this webinar within 48 hours, in addition to a link to the slides. I would like to thank you for attending today's webinar, the top 9 Percona Toolkit tools that can make your life easier. It's presented by Percona Senior Database Tools Developer and Specialist Daniel Nichter. And in addition, Matt Griffin, who is Percona's Director of Product Management, will be joining Daniel for the Q&A part of the show. With that said, I'd like to turn the floor over to Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel.
All right, thanks, Elisa. So this is the top 9 Percona Toolkit tools that can make your job easier. There is actually a lot of tools that we could cover. When I give this presentation, it usually takes upwards of an hour. So we have a lot of ground to cover. I'd like to start off with some advice for getting the most from this talk, and then I'll say a bit about what Percona Toolkit is in case you haven't heard of it, and then we'll jump right into the survey of those 9 tools, and then we'll have a quick summary. So first, I encourage people not to try and take notes, mostly because, like I said, there's a lot of content in this talk. We go through it pretty quickly, and you'll miss a lot of the demonstrations and whatnot, because everything that I'm going to discuss and a whole lot more is already online, so you won't miss out on anything. Also, because we're going to go through the tools pretty quickly, and some of the tools can really do a lot of things, but I'm only going to demonstrate the major aspects of the tool, show a few things. This means that there's usually a lot of unanswered questions, and that's okay. We'll have the Q&A at the end, but again, answers and a lot of information are already online. The tools documentation is pretty extensive. There are other blog posts, even other webinars and stuff. So, if going through this presentation, you start to have a lot of questions. Can the tools do this or that, etc.? That's okay. Don't worry. The answers are there. For right now, I just want to show you these tools, just 9 of them. And like the last point says, this is a survey, so only have time to show you 9 tools and show you the basic usage of those 9 tools. So it's really to help spark ideas. You'll see the range and breadth of things that the toolkit can do, and it'll start to make you think, oh, I could probably use that in my organization, or maybe I can use this tool to do something we've been doing in-house. So it's really to help you spark ideas, and then from there we can consult the online documentation and other resources and answer questions as necessary. So basically, sit back and relax and enjoy the demonstrations. So, quick word about what is Percona Toolkit in case you've never heard of it. In general, it's a collection of command line tools for MySQL, Percona Server, and MariaDB. It's really agnostic about the database technology. So pretty much, any fork or variant of MySQL will work. And it covers a wide range of DBA tasks. And you'll see that just by the demonstration of these 9 tools. You'll see, that it does everything from, help you work with duplicate indexes to, doing online non-blocking alter table statements. So it has a really, really wide range of tasks. And we're only covering 9 of roughly 30 tools in the entire toolkit, but these are kind of the 9 biggest, most popular ones. What's also interesting about the toolkit, and one of its strong points, is that it's professionally developed, supported, and maintained by Percona. So there are a few other toolkits out there, but this one is 6 years old. I know that because I've been with Percona for 6 years, and it's been my primary job working on the toolkit. And we have two full-time developers, and Percona support people know all about the toolkit, and when you have a support contract, you can get bug fixes done for the tools. So it's professional software, and we use it ourselves, of course. We use it internally, and we use it with customers. It's really proven in the real world. So even though it's free open source software, it's quite tried and true and proven. To that point also is the third bullet point, which is that these tools are 6 years mature. There are thousands of tests, and we test on 20 different environments and have two full-time developers. Those 20 different environments are combinations of MySQL 5.0, 5.1, 5.5, 5.6, Red Hat operating systems, Debian operating systems. So we really test this formally, in addition to the fact that it's used by thousands of people and companies for 6 years now. And of course, best of all, it's free and open source, so no cost to you. It's a pretty great deal. And you can look into the source code, see what it's doing, and even submit patches and bug fixes too. So with that, let's now move right into the heart of the presentations. Jump right in, with tool number 1 of 9. Right before I begin, you'll notice all throughout the presentation I'm going to be switching from the slides over to my terminal like this, because this presentation is really also a demonstration. I could tell you about the tools, but that's pretty dry and boring. Instead, I'm going to actually show you the tools in action. So to do that, I have my terminal, but I also have this script of stuff done, so that way the presentation goes nice and smoothly, and you actually see things working instead of me fumbling around with getting the right commands. So sorry for the little bit of delay and lag switching between the two. It's just necessary. So with that said, let's begin. Tool number 1 is pt-archiver. So officially, out of the tools documentation, the kind of one-liner description for this is archive rows from a MySQL table into another table or file. In other words, what this tool does is it basically removes useless data, but safely and slowly. And those are kind of the key words there, safely and slowly, because anyone can get into the database and just start deleting data and dropping tables and all that kind of stuff. Anyone can write a tool or a script that just removes data, but if you want to do this in production and be nice to your users, you probably want to do it safely and slowly, not impact regular production workloads. So that's the key thing about this tool, is it does this safely and slowly. So why use this tool? Why remove useless data? Well, two benefits are faster queries. Of course, this is a simplification, but the less data you have, the faster queries can run, because there's less data to search through and sort and work through for MySQL. So very generally speaking, if you keep your table sizes down, remove that useless data, helps your queries run faster. But another interesting benefit to this is easier backups, for the same reason. It's a lot easier to back up and a lot quicker to back up, say 1 gigabyte versus 100 gigabytes. So if you really don't need that old data, it hasn't changed in a long time, archive it somewhere, keep a smaller working set, and that makes backups a whole lot quicker and easier. As well as restoring those backups, which everyone should do. Try to restore your backups to make sure that they actually work. So let's see this tool in action. So another quick thing to note about the environment that I'm using here is all throughout the presentation, I'll be using the Sequila database. If you're not familiar with the Sequila database, it is a standard reference example database provided by MySQL, and it simulates a video rental store when such things still existed. So it's a bunch of tables, a bunch of data, and it's not important the details. I just use it because it gives me something to work with. So throughout the presentation, you'll see me kind of reloading this database as we modify it and tweak it. So let me first create a table called old rental. Like I said, this database models a video rental store, so we have a table called rental, which stores all the information about videos that have been rented. And let's say that we wanted to clean up that table, get rid of old rentals. So let's take a look at what we're dealing with here. So what I've done is I've just selected a count of the total number of rentals before January 1st, 2006. This is really old example database, so that's why the dates are so old. So we can see in this example table here that we have about 15,800 rows before 2006. So PT Archiver can help us safely and slowly remove all these old rows because we probably don't need rental data from before 2006. So again, I'll remind you, don't worry too much about the command lines that I'm using because this demonstration is not about explaining the command lines and all the options. It's about showing you what the tool can do. So online documentation, don't worry too much about this. But in general, what I'm instructing the tool to do now is move rows from the real rental table to the old rental table that I created. And I'm saying do this for all rows earlier than 2006. And that's really all that's going to do. But it has a lot of internal stuff to do it safely and slowly. And here's one example. So I ran my command, but immediately the tool kicks me back and says, there's a problem with character sets. The source DSN is using Latin 1, but the table that you're going to archive into is using UTF-8. So this is an example of the tool, looking out for you. If you had a mix of character sets and you were trying to archive data between the two, you could wind up corrupting your data because of that character set mismatch. So in my particular case, I'm just going to tell the tool to ignore the character set because I know it's not an issue in this case. And we'll go ahead and let it run. And one thing you'll notice as this is happening is that this is only working on about 15,000 rows, and I have an SSD drive, but it's going pretty slowly. This is again a demonstration of the fact that by default the tool tries to be gentle on a production machine. So the reason it's going slowly right now is because it's archiving every single row in its own transaction. So basically row by row by row. Of course, when you have 15,000 some odd transactions and committing those all to disk and stuff, that's going to make it pretty slow. In a few minutes here, I'll demonstrate the tool in another way, and I'll fix this by increasing the transaction size, and you'll see that it speeds it up pretty significantly. So we'll let that run for just a few more seconds. Don't worry, it will complete, but it is slow by default. Because like I said, it tries not to burden your production systems too much. So give that a few seconds. Okay, good. So in the output here, we can see this is just a summary of what it did. And we could see that it in fact selected 15,000 rows, and it inserted 15,000 rows, and it deleted 15,000 rows. So this isn't an exhaustive proof of the tool doing the correct thing, but it gives you a real good sense that we were expecting to archive about 15,000 rows, and in fact we selected and inserted and deleted 15,000 rows. But here's a better check. So what I just did is I selected the total number of rows from the old rental table. This was the table into which we were archiving. And we can see that this brand new table now has those 15,000 rows that we were expecting. And by contrast, I'll go up to my original query here and select from the original rental table. And you can see that the original rental table has gone from having those 15,000 rows to just having one left. In fact, all the data in here was pretty much before 2006, so that's why it's all gone. And that, in general, is what this tool does. Of course, this is a very brief introduction to the tool, but that's the heart of its job, is archiving data like that. Let me show you one other thing it can do, though, which is instead of moving the data to a new table, it could simply delete the data if that's what you want to do too. Let me rebuild my Sequila database. Fix that. So I'm going to restore my Sequila database just like it was before. So instead of archiving the rows, what I'm going to do is just tell the tool to simply delete the rows. So this is also a good option. Let's say that you just knew that you didn't need that old data at all. So right here at the end, I'm specifying the purge option, which means go through, find the old rows, and simply delete them. Just get rid of them. You may also notice that I've increased the transaction size to 1,000 instead of doing it one by one. This would only do about 15 transactions instead of 15,000 transactions. So we'll give this a few seconds to run. And you can see it completed a lot more quickly this time because I increased the transaction size. But kind of same result. This time we selected the 15,000, we deleted it, but you'll notice we didn't insert anything. And that's what we were intending. We didn't want to insert these rows into another table. We simply wanted to get rid of them. And we can verify that again by selecting from the table, and once again, most of the rows are gone from the table. So there's a lot of other options and features and safety checks inside this tool. And if you're doing operations like this, regularly getting rid of old data, I encourage looking into this tool because it's one of the oldest tools. In fact, it's actually about 7 years old. It predates Percona Toolkit even. So it's been around for a long time. It's really reliable, really good for getting rid of old data. So let me switch back to my slides, and let's move on to a completely different tool, which is pt-duplicate key checker. So the one-liner from the tool says, find duplicate indexes and foreign keys on MySQL tables. In other words, what this tool really does is it removes useless indexes safely. We really try to focus on safety when it comes to our tools. So why would you want to remove duplicate indexes? Well, you'd be surprised how often in the real world we see tables that have just a bunch of indexes, and a lot of them are duplicates, and it just makes the table simpler to understand. It's simpler for developers and simpler for operations people when they need to migrate things. So if you don't need these duplicate indexes, don't keep them around. Also, it is a performance consideration. Indexes, require MySQL to do some extra work when inserting and updating rows because obviously you have to maintain those indexes. So if you have duplicates, then it's just extra wasted work for MySQL. So let me restore my Sequila database again. And because Sequila is a reference database, we know that it doesn't have any duplicate indexes because it's supposed to be a good example. So to prove that, what I'm going to do is run the tool real quick on the Sequila database, and it should tell us that there's no duplicate indexes because, in fact, there are none. So this is kind of like our control. So I ran the tool on the Sequila database, and no output, no duplicate indexes. So that's good. The tool has not gone crazy. So, but let me load a table real quick here, and I'll show you that table. And this table does have a duplicate index. So here's the table that I'll highlight here in my terminal. Now, normally when I do this this presentation in person, at conferences and whatnot. I have people, think about this table for a few seconds and then, tell me what is the duplicate index in this table. In webinar format, that would be a little bit more difficult. So take just a few seconds, look at this table and see if you can spot the duplicate index. Okay, now let's see what the tool says about this table. So again, don't worry about how I'm running the tool. This is a demonstration of it at work. All I'm doing is telling the tool to run on this table that we see right here, and let's see what it said. So it finds a duplicate index, and it gives us a fair amount of information. In fact, the one cool thing about this tool, there's a few cool things actually, is that it says, first of all, just what exactly is the problem, kind of in plain English. It says IDX1 is a left prefix of IDX2, and then it gives you those, two index definitions, and then also their column types, because sometimes that matters. And then what's interesting is it gives you the alter table necessary to, fix it. So let's look at what it's saying. So it's saying that this index, IDX1, is a duplicate of IDX2. Now obviously they look different, but what it's saying is it's a duplicate because IDX1, which is over TRXID, is the same left prefix as in IDX2. And this isn't a discussion about how indexes in MySQL work and whatnot, but basically you can get rid of IDX1 because IDX2, since it has the same left prefix, will serve the same purpose. It'll allow MySQL to do the same optimizations, plus others because IDX2 has other right side columns. So you could drop IDX1 and not lose anything. And in fact, that's why we get this, this alter table to drop IDX1. You'll also notice that all these lines start with hash marks, which means that they're comments, except for this alter table. This is because in theory, you could do something like this. You could run the tool and pipe the output directly into MySQL, and it will run every alter table statement that it generates. So far, I've not met anyone willing and brave enough to do this. Now, the tool is reliable. For years, it didn't have a single bug, and then finally someone found a bug a couple months ago, and we fixed it. But in theory, that's kind of the idea. But I guess I shouldn't suggest that either. Really, you should review the output and make sure it seems logical and reasonable to you. There's some subtle bug cases which might be difficult to grasp. If you get some output from the tool and you don't quite understand it, ask on the Percona forums. If you think it's a bug, submit a bug, and then we can work with it like that. But so far, there's no known bugs with this tool because we fixed the last one a couple months ago. And yeah, it handles a lot of pretty sophisticated cases. Like it knows it can handle foreign keys as well. It knows to keep uniqueness constraints on columns. So it's pretty sophisticated. Because of time constraints, I can't go too much more into the details. But I think you get the point from here that it's a quick and easy way to find duplicate indexes, and it gives you the command to remove them. And this is just a really good thing to do. So let's move on to tool number 3, yet another kind of very different tool, which is pt-mysql-summary. Very simple tool as well. So this summarizes MySQL information nicely. I like to think of this as a MySQL tricorder, and I realize that that reference doesn't resonate with everyone. A tricorder comes from Star Trek. In Star Trek, people have these little handheld devices pictured here, and you can point it at anything, and it will tell you everything about the thing you're pointing it at. So if you point it at a human being, it tells you everything about that human's vital signs. If you point it at a rock, it tells you how old the rock is and what it's composed of. So it's this really fancy, sophisticated information gathering tool. So the benefit of this tool is it makes it really easy to learn about a MySQL server. In Percona, this is really helpful for us because we deal with thousands of different MySQL servers. Every day people are getting on new MySQL servers, and they need just a quick idea of what this server is like. What are they dealing with here? And that's why we developed this tool. And generally, you can just run the tool. It doesn't really have any command line options. I have to specify a command line option because I'm running MySQL in a sandbox. But apart from that, you just run the tool, and you get an output like this. And there's a lot of output, but not a lot of time. So I won't go through everything. We'll just pick out a few key things. So basic information about the MySQL server. What version is it running, for example? Is it a slave? And does it have is it a slave, and does it have any slaves connected to it? A quick snapshot of the process list. Of course, the process list is always changing, but it gives us at least some idea. A quick comparison of status counters, just over 10 seconds. Again, to give us kind of an idea of how fast these metrics are changing. Then we go down to stuff about like if this is running a Percona server, are certain features supported, enabled, or not, etc. Kind of see how the system is configured. Things about query cache, if you're still using query cache. A section, like it says, on other noteworthy technologies. Then information about binary logging, because binary logging is, of course, very important. And then in another list of noteworthy variables. So, this is good for people who work on different machines, or it's also good if you just happen to have forgotten what your machine was like, or a particular machine is like. I've also heard of people taking this output and version controlling it, and then they run it at intervals, and if something changes, then they can spot that change. Like, for example, if someone changes the read buffer size, they can spot that. The tool isn't specifically developed to do that, but give you an idea. So that's all the tool does, is it just tells you about a MySQL server. So tool number 4 is closely related. Same thing, kind of, but it applies to the server itself. So in summary, it summarizes system information nicely. So this is like a tricorder for the server itself. And the benefit is it makes it really easy to learn the basics of a server at a glance. So to demonstrate this one, I'll switch over to a VirtualBox here. And the tool is pt-summary. The command is pt-summary. There's no options. Best to run it as root because it looks at things like RAID controllers, and usually you need root to run those kind of things. So run it as root, and you'll notice that once it pops up, the output is similar, broken down into sections, and it's just basic stuff about the operating system. So for example, it can detect virtualization, and in fact, it's correct. I am running VirtualBox on this machine. Basic stuff about your processors and how fast they are, memory usage, information about mounted file systems in the disk. I don't have any RAID controllers here, but obviously it's pretty common in the real world, and I don't have any LVM volumes. But it detects a number of RAID controllers, and it could tell us stuff about, like say, the battery backup unit status, all sorts of interesting information. And quick snapshot of top processes. So again, just a quick and easy way to get an idea of what this particular server is like. Pretty simple. So let's move on to tool number 5 of 9, and we're doing about right on time because these next tools are a little bit more complex and involved than the pt-summary and pt-mysql-summary tools. So tool number 5 is pt-online-schema-change. This is one of the newest and maybe one of the most popular tools. So officially, it alters tables without locking them. In other words, it does hot online alter table. As you probably know, MySQL 5.6 now supports this too, what is commonly referred to as online DDL in the documentation. But before 5.6, anytime you would do an alter table, it required locking the table, which basically blocked all access to it. In a production environment, obviously that doesn't work. You can't just, block access to a table. And as luck would have it, it's usually like our busiest, most important tables that we need to change. Because now we're really using them, and we really need this column like that, or to add an index. They're important tables, but ironically, they're the ones that we can't lock. So before 5.6, the only solution was an online schema change tool like this one. In fact, Facebook developed one, Shlomi Noach developed one for OpenArc, but each of those two tools was kind of particular implementation, not really a general use tool. So we kind of combined the best of both worlds and extended the development to support things like foreign keys, and made a general use tool, a tool for everybody, and it's been pretty popular. So the benefits are zero downtime. You can change tables without any downtime. Low impact. So the tool tries really hard to do its job, but also stay out of the way. Let normal production workloads happen, but still get the alter table done. And to that end, it also tries and retries, because when you're altering a busy table, you invariably run into lock contention and even deadlocks, and all sorts of things happen. So the tool really keeps trying to finish its job. So let's take a look at this tool. I will first rebuild the Sequila database as usual, and then I'll show you one of the Sequila tables. Very, very simple table. So Sequila database has a table called country. It's a list of all countries in the world. Since it's several years old, it's a little out of date, but whatever. So very simple table: country ID, country name, and then a last update column. So let's pretend that this is a busy table, and we can't take it down, but we really need to update it. And what we want to do is we want to drop that column last update. Because how often do countries change anyway? So we run the tool, we specify the alter command that we want without the actual alter table, so just the drop column last update, and we let it do its magic. But before I hit enter, I'll remind you that I said we really focus on doing things safely with the tools. So I'll run it, but you'll see it doesn't get very far. It immediately kind of exits with an error message and says, well, you didn't specify an alter foreign keys method, but there are foreign keys that reference this table. So this is the tool, doing the safe thing. It found that there are foreign keys, but we didn't tell it how to deal with them, so it bailed out. So I'm going to just tell it to deal with those foreign keys however it sees best fit with the auto option. And let's give it a try again. So I got a little farther maybe that time, but another error message. So this time it says exiting without altering Sequila country because neither dry run nor execute was specified. Okay, so this tool we made really safe. We gave it two modes, dry run and execute mode. And because this alters data, I very highly suggest that you always run dry run mode first. And because although there's some things that you can't actually do in dry run mode, it does actually run through most of the code and the logic and stuff, and it's a really good first approximation of is it going to work, successfully. So you should always do dry run first. So let's do a dry run real quick here. And there's a lot of output, but we don't have to worry too much about it. Specific output for this run was right here, highlighted. So it went through, did as much as it can. It actually created the new table, although it didn't, alter the existing one. And did as much as it can. And then at the end, we see there's basically no errors, and it says, dry run complete, but the original table was not altered. So again, in the interest of time, I can't do an exhaustive demonstration, but if there's a problem, like my first two runs, the tool will stop and make it clear, like, hey, there's a problem, there's something you need to look into. If a problem doesn't jump out, then it should be good to go. So we switch dry run to execute, and this should do the real thing. And at the end we get a nice easy confirmation that Sakila country was successfully altered. And here in the middle we can kind of see the work happening. It's copying tables, copied the tables, and then it updated the form keys, then it swapped the tables, and it did all of its magic, no errors. It says it was done. So let's take a look at that table again. And sure enough, now we're just down to country ID and country as we expected. So there's a lot more safety checks built into this tool, and I'm certain that you'll run into them because it's really important that this tool completes successfully. So it really looks at what you're trying to do, and if it's unsure about something, it'll tell you, I'm going to do this, but I need you to confirm it before I actually do it. And so far, we've had a lot of success with this tool. It's very popular and very helpful. But, if you're using MySQL 5.6, and I would encourage you to upgrade, a lot of alter table statements can be done, online, non-blocking, built into 5.6. So you might not need pt-online-schema-change. But there's, a lot of people still run 5.5, in which case you'll need pt-online-schema-change. The other interesting thing about pt-online-schema-change is it'll give you a status about, how long it's probably going to take to complete, whereas MySQL 5.6 built-in online DDL won't do that. So that's one reason people still use it, even for 5.6. So let's move on to tool number 6 here. This is another really big, important tool. Also, well, we rewrote it about 4 years ago, I think. This is PT Query Digest. Officially, it analyzes MySQL queries from logs, process list, and TCP dump. Really what it does is it kind of has, one big job, and that is to find slow queries. And the reason why is because benefit number one is that, performance optimization task number one is finding and fixing slow queries. Really, when it comes down to performance, if you can find your slowest queries and then fix them, in other words, make them faster, fix why they're slow, rewrite them, whatever, that is, task number one when it comes to performance optimization. And that's the heart of what this tool does. And it can do other things like, track and review queries, but performance, finding those slow queries so you can fix them is really the heart of it. So this is one of the most it's easy to use, but it's also a bit of an art form too, and I'll show you here. So I'm just going to run the tool on some data from the real world that was actually submitted to us as a bug example to give you an idea. We actually used to do a training class on this. There's so much information you can glean from this tool, but I'll break it down real simply for right now just to demonstrate. So I ran it on this sample input. It actually happens to be MySQL information off the wire, TCP dump. It starts off with a high-level summary of everything. So we see that in my sample there were 265 total queries, only 35 of which were unique. the grand total query execution time, and for all queries in this sample, was 330 milliseconds. I know that's very underwhelming, 330 milliseconds, but it's not the size of the numbers that matter. It's their, their ratios and proportions in relation to one another. So grand total time of 330 milliseconds. And in the next section, we get what we call the profile, which is a quick breakdown of which of those queries account for that 330 milliseconds as a percentage. So query number 1 is this select FB alert press, and we see right here that this one query accounted for 54% of all the query execution time. So in other words, basically half of all time spent by MySQL is spent executing this query. So this tells you, clearly, like if you really want to improve performance, start with query number 1 first, because if you can, let's say, eliminate this query, you probably can't eliminate it. Hopefully, it's needed, not completely superfluous. But if you can really cut down the execution time for this query, then you free up a lot of, time for MySQL to do other tasks. So it tells you right here, this is query number 1. It accounts for 54%. Look into it and see why it's running slowly. And then from the profile, we go on to a detailed breakdown of each of those queries in their profile. So here again is query number 1. Again, in the interest of time, I don't have the time to go through all this information, but it gives you all the metrics that were in the log about the query, basic statistical summary about those metrics, a histogram of the query response time broken down into some rough buckets, and then an actual example of the query. So the query is kind of simple, just select some columns from a table where user ID equals something. So from this point, knowing that this is query number 1, the slowest query in the group, we would start to investigate this query. Maybe there's not an index on the user ID column, who knows? But now that we know, where the problem lies, the most significant problem, we know where to focus our efforts, and that's the power of this tool. So let's move on to tool number 7, which I always kind of gloss over in the interest of time, which is pt-stalk. So it collects forensic data about MySQL when problems occur. In other words, it helps you do a post-mortem analysis of MySQL problems. So the benefit is you probably already experienced this, but when you have problems with MySQL, it's oftentimes very difficult to catch MySQL in the act, so to speak. So you need some sort of tool that's running constantly, watching for it, and then collecting the right data when it happens. And so that's the benefit of this tool. It never sleeps so that you can, and it collects a lot of vital data. More importantly, this tool was born of the experience of many people at Percona, because we realized that when people write their own tools and scripts to collect data, to collect postmortem data, or data for a postmortem analysis, not always is the correct data collected. But it's important to collect all the correct data at the time of the problem. So one of the special things about this tool is it really collects a lot of data, and it's the right data for doing a post-mortem analysis. So in the interest of time, I don't demonstrate this tool, but if you have a need for it, you probably already know, and I suggest checking out this tool. So tool number 8 of 9 is another very large yet very simple to use tool, very powerful tool, pt-table-checksum. So officially it verifies MySQL replication integrity. In other words, what it really does is it finds slaves with incorrect data. In other words, it finds slaves that have become out of sync with the master, that don't have the same data as the master. And that's the whole point of a slave, right, is to be identical to the master. But this happens all the time in the real world. It's a very common problem, and that's why this is a very popular tool. So the benefits are it's very important knowledge for very little effort. It's critical to know if a slave has become out of sync, and it's easy to find. And second benefit, knowing that the problem exists, is the first step towards fixing it. And this tool makes it easy. So I'll demonstrate real quick. Let me once again restore my Sequila database. And then what I'm going to do to demonstrate this tool is previously we saw that Sequila has a list of countries. And in fact, the slave that I'm running is correct and up to date with the master. So what I'm going to do to make the slave out of sync with the master is I'm going to insert a row directly into the slave. I'm going to insert another country. So our slave will have one extra row that it shouldn't. So that's all I'm going to do. And then I'm going to run the tool on the database. And there's a lot of output. Don't worry. I'll break down the important parts for you. Let the tool run for a few seconds as it goes through all the tool tables. So here's the output. Lots of columns. But in the interest of time, I'll just kind of point out the most important details. Which one of them is this diffs column. So this tells you if there's any differences on any slave for this particular table. I happen to run it on all the databases and tables on my machine right now. So the one we're interested in is the Sequila country table, which is right there. And unsurprisingly, because I just created a difference on that table on the slave, here in the diffs column we see that we have a 1 right here. And no other columns have a 1 because all the rest are in sync. And this is really all the tool does. And it's really just as simple as running it on your server. It, in a lot of cases, it automatically finds all your slaves, connects to them, and then starts finding differences like we've done here. So the flip side to that is okay, so this tool has found differences on a slave somewhere, on a table somewhere. But how do I fix that? Well, this tool has kind of a companion closely related is the final tool number 9, which is pt-table-sync, which synchronizes MySQL table data efficiently. In other words, it's the flip side to what we just saw. It fixes slaves with incorrect data. Benefit, of course, is that it makes it easy to do this and you get your slave back in sync. So we know that we have that difference on the slave. Let's run pt-table-sync on the slave, but tell it to sync to the master. And moreover, what I'm going to do is tell it to print the difference, basically. And we should get something like this. So what has happened here is I ran pt-table-sync on the slave and told it to synchronize to the master. And it went through the whole table and it found that difference that we created. And then it generates this delete statement, which will actually run on the master. I know this may sound a little complicated right now. This is not a technical talk. But what happens is we run this delete statement on the master. And it's a null operation on the master because the master doesn't have this extra row. But it goes through replication. It hits that slave with the extra row, and it deletes that extra row and brings the two back in sync. So this is a very, glossing over a whole lot of details. But like I said, this is a demonstration of tools that's meant to spark ideas. So from here, what the point is that pt-table-checksum is a tool that you can use to make sure that your slaves are in sync with the master. Very easy to use. I highly encourage that you try it. And then if there are any differences, then you can use pt-table-sync to fix them. So in summary, because we're right at about time, I think a few minutes over actually, the 9 tools. pt-archiver removes useless data. pt-duplicate key checker removes useless indexes. pt-mysql-summary, quick way to learn about a MySQL server. pt-summary, learn about a system quickly. pt-online-schema-change is hot online alter table, non-blocking. pt-query digest helps you find slow queries so you can fix the slowest one first and improve the performance of your MySQL server. pt-stalk collects vital data for postmortem analysis when a MySQL problem occurs and no one's around to catch it in the act. pt-table-checksum finds slaves with incorrect data, which is a surprisingly common problem in the real world, yet it's easy to find with pt-table-checksum. And then pt-table-sync fixes the incorrect data on slaves. So that's just 9 of the roughly 30 tools in Percona Toolkit. It's free, open source software. You can download it from our website, and there's lots and lots of resources online. So thank you, and with that, I will turn it over to Matt Griffin for the Q&A.
Thanks, Daniel. I really enjoyed the walkthrough of 9 of many tools in Percona Toolkit. So we've got some great questions from the audience. Thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions, and please continue to submit more questions through the GoToMeeting tool. So let's just begin. Daniel, at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned that the tools are pretty much database agnostic. And actually, just kind of talk about that in terms of databases supported by Percona Toolkit. Can you expand a little bit there?
Yeah, so basically it's MySQL and any true MySQL variants. And I say true MySQL variants because the thing that comes to mind right now is that, for example, MariaDB Server 10 has some pretty significant, deviations from the standard MySQL base. So if there's some exotic changes in there, maybe it might not work with it. But by and large, all the tools work on just your core basic MySQL stuff. So, earlier versions of the MariaDB server are perfectly fine. Percona server, perfectly fine. MySQL, 5.0 through 5.6, community or enterprise edition, they're all pretty much the same, and therefore the tools, are agnostic about it. They work the same.
So what about any operating system differences? Is Solaris supported if you're running MySQL on Solaris?
Well, we do have a list of officially supported operating systems. If you go to the Percona Toolkit page on percona.com, in fact, I think it's that one I've linked to right here, there's a list of supported platforms. And officially, it's basically Ubuntu, CentOS, Red Hat, and Debian. So I can tell you that Windows is not officially supported, although some people have reported success running certain tools on Windows. Solaris is not officially supported and not tested either. BSD derivatives come up every now and then, like FreeBSD. Again, not supported, but I've seen enough people using it. For the most part, the tools are standard Perl or standard Bash. So we try to design them to work in most places, but we only officially support, like I said, like CentOS, Red Hat, Debian, Ubuntu.
Okay. And then are there any differences between MySQL Community and Oracle's MySQL as part of their enterprise subscription?
I've never heard any. I don't think so. What I know about the differences wouldn't affect the tools, so I would say most likely not.
Okay. Can we use the PT Archiver tool if the table has foreign keys?
Yes, but it's probably, well, it depends on the nature of the foreign keys, how complex and what you want to do. PT Archiver has a plugin system, so you can write Perl modules that plug in at various stages of the archiving process and handle foreign keys. We've done this a couple of times for customers in the past. So, out of the box, no. Generally, you have to write a plugin, and then it boils down to, how complex are the foreign key relationships.
Okay. If the table has triggers defined, will pt-online-schema-change work?
No. So that's a recent issue that someone filed. So to keep things simple at the start, pt-online-schema-changes uses triggers to do some of its internal magic. To keep things simple and to kind of semi-guarantee that it does the right thing. The tool is designed to be the only user of triggers on the table, so to speak. If there are any other triggers, it won't work. But someone recently submitted a patch that allows before triggers in addition to the after triggers that pt-online-schema-change has. So we might support additional triggers in certain cases, but right now there cannot be any other triggers.
Okay. And why doesn't pt-online-schema-change have the dry run option on its default?
Have the which option?
The dry run option.
Oh, mostly to force people to realize that there are two different options. Because if dry run was on by default, people might run the tool and it would kind of look like it ran and was successful, and they might not even realize that it was just a dry run. So by forcing people to, explicitly, state dry run or execute, makes them explicitly aware that these are two different modes. So this, this tool is, so mission critical that we really made it kind of nag users, but it's for the better because this tool cannot mess up. So it's imperative that users understand when they're using it.
Great, great. Everyone, please continue to ask your questions, and we'll get to them. Yeah, here's a question about a kind of a master-slave setup. So, can you run pt-online-schema-change on a master while the slaves are up and running, or should the slaves be shut down and just run the change on the master?
No, you can run it on the master, and that'll work. The only, kind of reported problems, one reported problem is that when you do the alter table, although MySQL 5.6 supports an in-place operation for the table, so it does not copy the entire table, that functionality is limited. In most cases, what you wind up doing is copying the entire table. And so the effect on the slaves is that that's a lot of extra traffic over replication because you're copying the table. The tool does have built-in kind of safeguards, so it doesn't overload the slaves too much. But when you run it on the master, you're probably going to see quite an increase in replication as it copies the table.
Okay. And speaking of, I think this is going to be our last question, but I ask the audience to please continue to type your questions, and we'll get to them in a follow-up blog post after today. But related to some of those checks you mentioned, what happens if pt-online-schema-change dies in the middle of a run for some reason?
Yeah, so right now, well, it's kind of complicated. It depends on how and where it dies. The general answer is that it basically, well, how to say this? It's not truly atomic, the final switchover, because of some limitations inside MySQL, that allow us to do this online alter in the first place. But it's, say, almost atomic. So once the tool says, okay, I'm done, then that's good. But if it fails at any time before that, then it hasn't touched the original table. So usually what you wind up with is kind of a temporary table with a varying amount of data, and then it's just kind of extra crap that needs to be cleaned up. And then the tool might actually automatically clean it up for you, again, depending on where and how it failed. So sometimes when it fails, the end result is no change at all. It just fails and says, oh, there was a problem and I cleaned up everything I was working on. In other cases, it'll fail and kind of leave behind the old data for various reasons. But the main point is so far I've never seen it fail at the point where, at the worst point, where the original table is now messed up and it hasn't been switched over. I've never seen that happen yet.
Okay, great. Well, we thank everyone in the audience for their questions and for joining this webinar. If you have any other questions or follow-ups, please type them now, and we'll get to them in a follow-up. Daniel will get to them in a follow-up blog post. And with that, I will hand it off to Elisa. Daniel, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Daniel and Matt, thank you for such a great job today. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. Next week we'll be doing practical MySQL performance optimization. Peter Zaitsev, our CEO and founder, will be doing that, so go ahead and sign up for that. And as I've told everyone, I will make sure that you will have a copy of a link to both the recording and the slides. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope everyone has a great evening, morning, or afternoon, depending where you're calling in from. Thanks again, guys.